And I was fully invested and I wanted really to fit in without losing my identity as an immigrant. But what I heard from my interim manager in front of everybody was, I don't think you guys know what you're doing. This is unacceptable. That was tough. And then I met with him after, and he basically said, I think I misunderstood what you guys are working on. Maybe it's your accent.
All right, that is a quick preview of my conversation today with my guest, Diego von Söhsten. Now, we talk about imposter syndrome a lot on this show, and most of the time it follows a very clear pattern. It's usually after somebody gets a promotion or a raise or a big title change, something like that. But Diego's story is a little bit different. He had this really tough moment after he'd already proven himself, really right when everything on paper probably looked the easiest. He had this one moment of public feedback that totally made him question if he even belonged anymore. Now, Diego has an incredible background. Today, he's the director of product growth at Jobber, probably one of the more thoughtful leaders I've had on this show, and his background is very impressive. PLG lead at Vidyard, director of product management at Vendasta before that, which is where this defining moment took place. He's also an immigrant. He grew up in Brazil before building his professional tech career in Canada. And in our conversation, we covered a ton of ground and he shared a ton of lessons in the stories that he learned from those lessons that have helped him navigate his career. We talked about the moment that this senior executive publicly tore down his work in front of 80 of his peers, how bias around his accent made him question his confidence, and what it took to rebuild that, regain his composure, and eventually, the story has a cool ending, earn a promotion. If you're new here, my name is Andrew Kaplan. Welcome to the show, where I get to chat with some of the top product marketing and growth leaders about some of the toughest moments in their career, and we pull out the lessons and learnings that you can apply to yours. It's enough from me. Let's go ahead and jump into my conversation with Diego von Söhsten.
I thought I would at some point maybe be a video game developer. Little did I know about sometimes certain things that work well as a hobby may not apply as well as a full-time job. And I learned my lesson with that. But that's where I was headed with it. I spent a lot of time when I wasn't studying trying to perfect something, which fortunately or unfortunately is my story early on. I thought I would be more involved in that industry.
And so how do we bridge from video games into Microsoft, SharePoint, and then eventually product management and growth product management?
I got into computer science, eventually did a master's in computer engineering. And then I learned that I couldn't really make a game, not without relocating somewhere else. So I decided to make software. And in the process of developing software, I learned that you need to know your customer. And then I understood that that part wasn't one that brought me the most joy. I learned that developing coding, that wasn't really for me. Now with Vibe Coding and all these other tools, and I can get really far with that without the stress of debugging and trying to find where something broke. And eventually from there, I found my way into product management, worked at ThoughtWorks for a bit. So I had a customer outside my country. So I was working for an American company. And then I worked with product managers, immigrated to Canada, got a formal product manager job title.
Dude, badass, man. That's a badass story.
Looking back, yes. It's hard to see that there's a direction, that there is a flow. Sometimes you look at these experiences and they feel disconnected. But when you look at the full big picture, actually, no, they're guiding you in a direction that maybe you didn't know that existed.
Well, and what's really interesting about what you were sharing is you kind of had a perspective where you said, hey, I don't want to do this thing anymore. I thought I wanted to do this thing and it was kind of interesting, but what I really want to do is this other thing. And I think about the conversations I've had on this show with different guests and just even my own personal conversations out there. I think that there are certain moments in your careers that looking back end up being these moments where you realize like, hey, that was the right call. So I'm curious for you, maybe as you do a little bit of reflecting during our conversation, if there's a career moment where you felt like, hey, maybe I made the right call here. Maybe I'm actually pretty good at this. Do you have a moment like that?
Interesting. I do. It's so hard to work in product management and not have imposter syndrome in some way.
I think in all startups to have that, right? It's like, I feel like startups breed this. It's like hard not to.
100%. I think it's just being able to really make that connection. I remember my younger self being at school, and in high school, we were grouped into these clusters based on the program that you wanted to pursue in university. So are you looking for a more arts related program? You had these classes, you had these groups. Then you had the people who were looking at a more science oriented career, and then the people who were more in the health side. And I remember being so bad at physics being awful at chemistry, but then acing mathematics and writing, which was weird. And people were, how do you do that? So it feels like you are curious to a certain extent about how things work, but not enough to disassemble pieces of equipment. But at the same time, you like communicating, you like writing, you like talking to people. And I think that maybe after I got my first product manager formal job, and that was already in Canada, because everything before that was a more product owner or consultant, that's probably where it made sense. And working with the team, finding solutions, measuring. I'm really passionate about data, and maybe that's where the mathematics experience early on makes sense. And then having wins. I think that having consistent wins is so important for you to be able to your question, to say, have you made the right decision? Have you made the right call? And at some point, when you win first, oh, maybe I got lucky. And then when you win again, maybe there's something here. But the process is definitely interesting.
I want to ask about some moments of tough feedback that you've had along the way. I want to dig into a few of the speed bumps and adversity and some of these moments that kind of shape the version of you that, one, is so successful, and two, the version that I get to meet today. So I'm curious to double click maybe on a moment of tough feedback along the way. After this moment where you start getting a few wins and you start to advance your career a little bit, what is one piece of feedback that you've received along the way here that you still think about today?
There's one piece of feedback that is literally a daily reminder to me of how to pause and make sure that you're thinking about something clearly. And I literally had a scar on my face. I still have it, and I'll get to it in a second. But shortly after I migrated to Canada and I had my senior product manager job at Vindasta. So I was living in the prairies in a more rural side of Canada. And I had this incredible boss, maybe the person who inspired me the most up until today. Her name is Jackie Cook. She was back then a chief strategy officer at Vindasta. She did some of my interview process. We vibed so much that I think 7 p.m. and we were still in the office talking to each other and we lost track of time, and eventually I got the job. So that person inspired me so much. The thing was, eventually she decided to raise a family and she went on mat leave.
I want to get into this moment, obviously, and I just want to set the stage for folks to understand. So you have this incredible boss. She begins her family, takes a little bit of time off. And that's like, this isn't like in the US where, if you're at a startup, they might be back in 6 weeks. They might be back in 3 months. If it's a very generous policy, they'll be back in 4 months. If you work at Google, maybe they'll be back in 6 months. No. Like in Canada, it's a little bit more generous and probably the way that we should all be modeling it, frankly.
I love that. +1 for all of that. Yeah, basically she went on a mat leave, and then I had an interim manager. So I had this GM who was the interim manager for maybe the owned and operated products. That's what we called ourselves. We were building some of Vindasta's products. We were in the process of going freemium. The 2 products that I oversaw in the Vindasta platform were already freemium. So we had this beautiful platform for agencies to resell tools to local businesses. However, there was a lot of miscommunication and lack of clarity in that process. First of all, I didn't know what product-led growth was back then. And that was my introduction to it. And that became the key point about my career. And then I've done that so many times after, but I didn't really know what that meant. Nor did my GM. All that we knew was that the board and the CEO really wanted to go freemium across the board. And I tried to communicate with him, trying to understand, hey, what changes for us? We want to help Vindasta be successful in this change. And what happened was that he had a lot on his plate, but also he wasn't the most effective communicator. I remember him canceling one-on-ones with me. And I think that the context was just, he was busy. I'll get some messages back on Slack and I'm unable to do our one-on-ones. Please send your questions asynchronously. And then a lot of those questions were actually never answered. And I struggled with that. And we had this milestone as an R&D team where all the product managers, the team leads, the designers would present their version of freemium in front of folks. And then I remember presenting with my teams without having a lot of conversation with my manager back then. And looking hindsight, I could have done more. I could have been more proactive having one-on-ones with other leaders in the company, but I was relying on that line of communication with him. And so far it was working for me with my previous manager, Jackie. Jackie was incredible and she opened so many doors to me, but I was that new Canadian there in the room who had an accent, who was taking speech therapy programs to reduce my accent to fit in, to learn about the culture, doing road trips on the weekend. I was that person. I was fully invested and I wanted really to fit in without losing my identity as an immigrant. But what I heard from my interim manager in front of everybody was, I don't think you guys know what you're doing. Like, not much is changing in your products. I believe you should rethink everything. We have a lot to talk about. This is unacceptable. The words that he used, honestly, at some point, my brain just shut down and I felt embarrassed and I stopped listening. I just found myself, I'm not saying things in a way he's understanding? Why does he not reply to me? Why am I feeling ashamed right now in front of 80 people?
This episode is presented by Navattic. If you've been following me or you're a fan of this show, you know how bullish I am on the interactive demo space and how much I love the Navattic team. Done a ton of stuff with them over the years, and they just dropped a bunch of new features that are really exciting. First, they've got a new template library. You can choose from a bunch of pre-made templates that have the most common demo use cases and all of the best practices built in, help you go 0 to 1 in a few seconds. If you're not sure what to build, they also have a new AI storyboard generator. It's exactly how it sounds. You drop in a website URL or some copy or a landing page, whatever you've got, it reads the information, pulls out the key sections, and then builds a working product demo for you in a couple minutes. And after you've built your demo, you'll probably want to use your data as part of your go-to-market approach. They've got a bunch of plug-and-play demo playbooks where you can send that interaction data to your CRM. You can use it to trigger alerts, all kinds of good stuff. It's actually a bunch of the things that my team built manually. It took us forever when I was in-house. So I love this. And after you've built your demo, if you need to make any adjustments, if you're displaying numbers or data as part of that, they have a new table AI feature, which helps you to clean up that data in a more conversational way and at scale in just a few seconds. They have made it so stinking easy to use your product as your marketing tool without needing an engineer or heavy design work. You can get started with all of this in their free plan. Check it out at navattic.com/value to get started. That's navattic.com/value. It's in front of 80 people?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you're in front of the room? Like, are you in front of an audience, like in front of some slides or something like that?
Yes. Each triad had, 3 to 5 minutes to present their update. And that was a key milestone for us. I remember the CEO walking by and then listening to some of the presentations. And then all my peers heard that. And I was the only one who heard that. That was tough. And then I met with him after. He accepted the next 101 we had in the books. And he basically said, I think I misunderstood what you guys are working on. Maybe it's your accent.
Wow. Maybe it's your accent. Wow.
Maybe it's your accent. Maybe you need to do something about this. I don't know if you'll be successful in this company. I think this will impact your performance as a product manager. If I don't understand you, other people probably don't understand you either. And then I didn't really have a reference because I had no immigrants on that team. And actually, I had really positive feedback across the board as far as I was concerned. I had great relationships with all the other VPs, with all the other product managers and teams. We hang out. I made some of my best friendships. I literally had most of my wedding party in my wedding last month. People that I met in that job who flew here to meet me. And I had so many great relationships, and I had a couple of performance cycles that were exceeds performance level. And then I still heard that. And I felt really hurt. I felt misunderstood. And I didn't know what to do because he didn't really give me any ideas. He just said, this is a problem. That sounded maybe bigger than what it actually was.
So what do you do after that? Well, first of all, how does that feel to go home that day, right? So you have this horrible presentation, and I've had a presentation like that when you're in front of the room. I think mine was in front of 45 people or something, where more or less it went similar. The details are personal to me, but the feeling and being in front of the room and sort of having this like, hey, I actually can't even hear anymore because my brain is just shutting down. I've had that before. That's horrible. And I remember how I felt for the rest of that day and how I went home at the end of the day. I'm curious for you, how did that feel to hear? And then you go into your next one-on-one and you're hoping for help from your manager, kind of rebuilding yourself, and it feels like maybe get chopped down another peg. And so how did all that feel? How did you internalize and try to work through all of that?
I didn't know how to process that because I thought I was winning. I thought I was doing something positive. I had taken a brand new product to market and we got an award at a conference weeks prior. And then just for me to feel like falling from the clouds. And I was still months away from having Jackie, my previous manager, back. So I didn't really know who to talk to. I remember venting to my peers, and then I had probably my first panic attack that day. And I remember going for lunch in the following days and going by myself and not wanting to go back to the office. I remember being late for meetings, procrastinating. I literally went on a trip once with friends, and in the middle of the night, I think I was having a nightmare about this experience. And I hit my head on the ground and I started bleeding. And then my friend just buys, I know nothing about makeup. And then she literally buys this concealer and all these other things. And don't worry, just put this every day when you're back and nobody will see anything. And then my CEO sees me. My CEO saw me and, oh, you got involved in a fight. Your trip was probably great. And I wanted to share so much with him that day, but I didn't. I said, oh, yeah, I don't know what happened. I lost my balance and I hit the ground. And people are like, what happened to your face? And I had this giant scar. Now it's just a tiny bit here. But I was never a person who got into the victim mindset. I was always someone who took extreme accountability for my actions. And I know that it's really on me to find satisfaction in my job, in my personal life, in everything. But that was probably the only moment, or maybe the main moment, when I felt there is something wrong. There's something foundationally wrong here. Basically, I was about to quit. I wrote a letter and I gave it to the VP of HR. And she was basically, Diego, what's happening? Why are you doing that?
What was in the letter, if you don't mind, Diego? Like, without sharing anything, obviously, that you don't want us to hear in this show, maybe you could just paraphrase, like, was it just you giving notice? Did it give context to what had happened or what you were feeling or something else?
I didn't get into the details because I felt that maybe what I was experiencing, I was the only one seeing. Maybe I do have a communication problem. Perhaps I'm not wired to succeed in this country. And of course, I played hard mode, going to a more rural area where people don't have that exposure. But being gay, being brown, having an accent, and even though I had a lot of wins under my belt, going through that experience, I couldn't really relate to anyone. And then she had a moment, she met with me in person, and what is happening? You're about to get promoted. Why is this happening? And I didn't want to open up. I said I had a traumatic experience and I didn't want to talk about it. What happened after that was that my previous manager, she was in Mexico during her mat leave, and she was in the last few months, I think, before coming back to work. And then she said, Diego, don't do what you're doing. Stop right there. Stop right there. I'll give you a plan. I'm going to run some ideas by you. I know you're trying to talk to folks and you're not really getting anything out of it. I don't know what happened, but please don't make any decisions right now. And then she advised me, she talked to a few other VPs. Basically, I learned that he fired a lot of people. My interim boss, he was firing people. He was creating this negative narrative about people that he didn't really appreciate working with. My team lead was one of them. A lot of people were on that list. And nobody could even explain, but it got into a very toxic behavior. She didn't tell me that, but she advised me to work with people to get a full understanding of what was happening and really to get feedback. And then people had their calendars more open. People were more welcoming then, and they were more enthusiastic to meet with me. And then I understood that I had to over-communicate. And then I understood that I had to ask for forgiveness and not permission. And then I understood that I had to put options on the deck and say, I'm leaning towards option A. Option B is also there. These are the trade-offs. I really learned how to be an effective communicator in those months where I didn't really have a manager. He was just skipping most of our one-on-ones. I still had a roadmap I was accountable for. I would show up in the CEO's room and, hey, I'm not getting a reply from my boss. And there is a milestone. What do I do here? Option A or option B? This is my recommendation, but what do you think? And meeting with a lot of people, still trying to do damage control with my team. My team was devastated and they're feeling everybody was about to quit. Thankfully, nobody quit from that group. But eventually she came back. And then I got another positive feedback cycle from my peers, not from my manager. But then when she came back, she was still trying to understand what happened. What happened was that we were building product-led growth of Indasta. We had someone who didn't have the experience, and we had someone who carried a lot of bias in that organization. And we had an inexperienced person coming from another country who had a lot to learn about communication. And months after that, I got promoted to director of product because we had delivered a really awesome freemium platform. That interim boss, the GM, became a stakeholder. He had to work with me. And that was pre-COVID. We had meetings, he had to show up and he had to talk to me and he had to give me status reports for his team. And I was thriving and we were winning. And Vindasta was actually really successful. COVID happened. We had made all these investments right before COVID. Local businesses needed to rely on online. We had a platform. We had a foundation that was very solid. And there I was. And I left on really good terms. Maybe if you talk to that manager, he wouldn't agree with what everybody else was saying.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the show. If you are, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening on. The data shows something like 40% of the people who listen to the show are actually subscribed. It is the best way for you to support the show, and it helps the algorithm find other listeners who are just like you. If you're feeling generous, a quick rating or review makes a huge difference as well. Thank you so much for listening and for your support. Now let's get back to this episode. Dude, that's a crazy, crazy story. And dude, kudos to you for working through it. I think it would be very easy and very comfortable and understandable to leave after that, to be like, hey, fuck this. This isn't the place for me. I don't like the way that this feels. I'm going to leave and go do something else that feels better and is more respectful to me. And you work through that, and that's hard and that's commendable. And the story has kind of a cool ending where you end up getting promoted and obviously you get to work with this person, but thrived in spite of it. And so, dude, you must have a strong inner game is where I'm going with this. I feel like a lot of leadership you can boil down. Once you kind of learn like the tactical stuff, you can kind of boil it down to great communication skills. And I don't mean like the way that you enunciate, because you got feedback on that, which feels unfair and maybe petty and shitty, I'm sure. And then so kind of your communication skills and your inner game, which is your ability to like manage your emotions when things aren't going well. And both of those are hard. You were playing it on hard mode, I think, having this interim manager. So what are the things that you take away from this experience that end up being additional tools in your belt? I'm curious to know about some of the things that you take with you from this that make you better. And then maybe also some that you had to put down that you've just said, hey, that was tough and that was shitty, and I'm not going to take that with you. I'm going to choose to put that down. What comes to mind as I ask that?
A lot comes out as you say that. And that was probably the lesson of a lifetime for me. I think that when you are a type A person and you're driven and you have a dream and you really want that dream to work, it's really hard to go through a situation like that and not ask yourself, what have I done wrong? And there are lots of things that I could have done better. Communication in terms of not relying on one bridge, knowing that, hey, maybe this cannot be my only bridge. Really, I don't know what's happening. I don't have a full picture, but I need more than ever to build relationships also with leadership. Sometimes you have all these relationships with peers and people get what you're doing, and then you have one way of making your message come across and reach C-level. And I learned that you have to be an effective communicator. I remember that the CEO would show up sometimes Friday afternoons and share roadmap dreams. I started showing up at his room too, and hey, I really need to make a decision and nobody else is replying to me. What do we do here? So
I love that.
Two-way streak. So creating more urgency and really building more relationships. I had such positive connections with everybody, but it was all, lunchtime connections or tell me about your weekend. It wasn't really, hey, people are dropping off of our product at this point, and why do we keep acquiring users from this cohort? This is screwing my numbers, and I'm sure that this is screwing the numbers for the company as well. How can we work together here?
It's like a difference between having a relationship and having alignment. It's like two different things. As someone else on this show, Elena Luneva, she described it as she went through a transition from being right to being effective. And that's kind of what you're talking about a little bit here too, where you may have been right, may have been wrong sometimes, but to be more effective and to build alignment, it's not just about like having lunch or having coffee or passing someone in the hall and knowing their name. It's about having them understand what you're working on, why, what your challenges are, what you need to be more successful. It's kind of what you're getting into here. I love that.
100%. And really trying to understand, because before, I think every product manager by trade will think about why do we exist? What problems are we solving with this product? How does my piece of this pie here contributes to the overarching success of the company, of the business? What are the metrics? I think sometimes we overly analyze numbers, but we forget storytelling. Storytelling was also a tool that I improved quite a bit back then. I remember every presentation of mine started with, why do we exist as a company? Why does this product exist? Why does this team exist? What are our OKRs? Now, after we talked about the persona, the strategy, the OKR, the North Star, let's talk about this one thing that we need to make a decision on. So I started, and some people would get really fed up and, oh, Diego, he's 5 slides again. But
dude, no. Dude, I love this. I literally tell every single coaching client to do this. I tell them, before you share the thing that you worked on, before you share the onboarding experiment, tell them what you're working on, why you're working on it, anything important about your operating system if you're testing or prioritizing speed over rigor, whatever it is, and then show them a thing with that context. Dude, I love this. This is what alignment looks like in practice. It's fucking repetition.
100%. And at some point, you will feel misaligned, and then you have to seek alignment again. And it's that game. It's, if you work in tech, you're herding cats 80% of the time. And that's fine. That comes with the job. And sometimes that can be fun too. There were cases I remember working on a project that didn't really feel aligned. I was literally putting together the slides and I asked myself, why are we working on this right now? And then taking a step back and putting ego aside, and I don't think we should be working on this, and having those conversations with folks. So alignment, definitely improving the storytelling to capture that alignment, advocating for me and my team, knowing that if you don't do that, no one else will. And there are cases where you get there when you're lucky enough to have maybe the role model, your mentor, your career coach to be your manager. And I think that that's where I was coming from. I was on cloud 9 and I was working with someone who was still is so skilled and competent, and she inspires, she brings the best out of everybody. And then you take a 180 where maybe that's not the circumstances you're in anymore. So you have to be the person for yourself and for your team. And I think that I also took away from that how to be a leader. I asked myself, what's the version of that I want to be as a leader? And then I took a lot away from Jackie and her incredible leadership. And I bring that up until today. And I really try to be as aligned as I can with my team, with my reports. Shortly after that traumatic experience, I got a team. We founded a product-led growth division at Indasta. I had acquisition PM, activation PM, retention PM, growth PM, or expansion PM. I had design in that org too. I think I had technical writers in that structure too. And then I had a team of 8 to 10 people, and we had an amazing relationship. Some of those, they're still frequent up to these dates. So I learned a lot about what leadership means. I think leadership is about focusing on what matters, removing the noise. Really, you have to be a filter for certain types of content you receive, and you have to pass along what truly matters to your team. You need to advocate for your team. You need to give them harsh feedback when harsh feedback is needed. But that feedback can be one-on-one. When constructive, it can be one-on-one. It has to be timely, but it has to be safe. You also need to recognize their wins in public. You also need to advocate for them. You need to talk about them.
Hey, real quick, if you've been enjoying this episode, I'm going to take a wild guess that you're a marketing, product, or growth team lead, which is also my background. And when I first started leading my very first growth team, I have never been more stressed and worked harder and longer in my career because I didn't really have the right system in place. I said yes to everything, and suddenly I was in every single meeting and all the decisions were flowing through me, and I still had my own individual contributor workload on the side. And eventually I stumbled into something that I now call my growth operating system. It's basically a plug and play framework with templates and rituals and how to structure meetings and how to create and document your strategy so that your team can move faster, you can run more experiments, you can win more without you being the bottleneck. So if any of that sounds like you and you're looking for some support, check out my growth operating system at deliveringvalue.co/OS if you want to have more impact and influence without working around the clock. It's deliveringvalue.co/OS. I'd love to hear what you think. So you mentioned all of these things that you got to take with you as a leader, as an employee, as a future manager of others, as someone who gives feedback to others and pays attention to how it makes them feel, if it lifts them up, if you're providing enough safety, all of those things. I'm curious to know, what would be a message that you want to have to other Diegos out there, other junior Diegos. So folks who are immigrants, who are feeling underrepresented, to folks who are struggling to find their place, who are wondering, like, should I keep going on this journey or should I not? Is this not the place for me? Folks that haven't made up their mind that I'm going to push through. What do you want them to hear?
I would say that you got to ask for help when you need help. You got to ask for advice. Everybody deserves a mentor. I like the idea of having mentors in different areas. I feel like they're important to you. And as I mentioned before, when it comes to work, sometimes your boss can be your mentor. But a lot of times it doesn't happen. I've been lucky for most of my career up until now, having incredible managers who are my mentors, but that wasn't a constant experience, as I could probably explain. So finding a mentor somewhere else. I remember signing up for all these online coaching platforms, looking for product coaches, trying to improve my storytelling skills. I would book all these free sessions, or in some cases, paid sessions. I would use learning and development budget. When there was no learning and development budget, I'll pay it out of pocket. But having the self-awareness to what are the areas where I need to improve, doing that applies everywhere in life. Again, communication, accent. I had a speech therapist and I taken programs and I worked on that. And there's still an accent, probably it won't go away at this point, but I'm very happy with it. And just being inspired, feeling inspired by people around you, being a little bit more self-compassionate, taking a pause and asking, hey, maybe I'm not skewing this. Maybe I'm not going to gaslight myself. Perhaps this situation has happened the way that I'm telling myself. And finding connection, finding community in people who have gone through a similar experience. The type of person I became is someone who will ask for help and be shameless about that. Like literally connecting on LinkedIn as I've done before in the past. Hey, I would love to talk to you. Do you have 15 minutes for me? There's a challenge that I have. And there's nothing wrong about that. In fact, you learn a lot about how to act in certain situations. And some of the work that I've done recently has actually been being a coach too. I like to think that I'm a coach to my teams at work. And I have mentored a lot of other people that have not necessarily worked with me just by modeling behaviors in situations where they were able to be there with me. But yeah, we might not feel represented in every room we're in, but there are people just like us who have fought a similar fight. You can reach out to them. I'm sure that most of them will be very happy to reply.
And your point is so good, which is if you don't have that person who's directly your people manager, which most of us don't, when we have an incredible manager who's also an incredible mentor, usually that time is fleeting. Like it feels like a long period of time when you're in it, but in the grand scheme of how many managers you have, usually it's a small portion of time. So go find that person somewhere else. And the best people, to work with have experienced both great management, I suppose, and mentorship themselves, and also horrible managers and horrible mentorship. And so to find somebody great to help you, it's like you almost need to find someone who's experienced both sides of the coin themselves. So I love that you have shared how you leverage all this experience to help others, which I think is beautiful.
I love that.
So switching gears a little bit, one of the other things I like to dig into are mistakes on the leadership journey, right? Folks who are listeners to this show primarily are either going through this transition or have just made this transition from being kind of the star individual contributor to now all of a sudden being a team lead and a manager and someone who's representing their capability at the executive level. So I'm curious to know for you, if in your journey, at least so far, if there's been any mistakes along the way in your leadership journey, and if so, what happened?
Totally. One that comes to mind was a time when there was someone on my team with a performance issue, and I wasn't really able to be helpful to him. And I think that I didn't act on the feedback that I received from others. So basically, that was a really highly competent guy who came from a FANG background.
Was this someone that you hired onto your team or someone who you inherited from another team or?
Someone that I inherited from another team. I wasn't part of the hiring decision, but I had a really positive experience with that person. So basically, he moved to my teams. Eventually, he wanted to work with me and he was having some challenges in his current team. And then it didn't take me too long to understand why. So he was coming from, I think, Microsoft at that time. And we were a scale-up. And the macroeconomics were not favorable to the business we're in. And we had a lot of challenges at that time. And that involved moving away from a more structured product leader to being a little bit more scrappy, to taking more risks, to being bolder. And that's a message, that was a change that product manager didn't really grasp. And I believe that there are certain things you can change and there are certain things that maybe you shouldn't change. But my expectation was that was a temporary situation. The macro we were in were tough. The team that person was in, that I inherited, that team maybe wouldn't exist 3 to 6 months later. That was the most stressful team in the company, working on very internal things. And then I knew that PM would shine building customer value and not necessarily internal tooling and internal systems. But that was the situation we had. I was hoping that positions would be freed up or that a case for a new team would go through for developing features or developing experiences on the growth side, and I'll be able to move him there. But then that didn't happen. There were layoffs in the company. Those teams actually ceased to exist. And then I was running out of options. And how do I keep such a competent, skilled, great communicator, excellent product manager in certain circumstances in that world? The reality was that I kept him, and maybe something could have been done back then. When I left that job, he was departed shortly after. And that was a reason. A lot of people didn't want to work with him. People wanted to be scrappy, and the feedback was that he was not being scrappy at all. So there's a place and a time. I think sometimes when we think about experiences, even for ourselves in product or in growth, we are not a great fit for everyone, right? Some people shine in 0 to 1 type of work. Some people shine in growth type of work. Growth means different things in different companies. Growth might mean only running experiments and equipping people with learnings in a company. Growth might mean creating product loops and doing more foundational things in another. So it's really important to have that stuff for awareness about what are your superpowers? What does a company need? And can I align these two? And as a leader, you have to do that not only for yourself, but also for other people. You have to have a critical judgment on that. And in some cases, it's just tough. If the company isn't winning, it's tough.
It seems like that's maybe an undercurrent of this conversation so far today. It's like finding the right moment at the right company, because the moments change. The company shifts, your manager changes, your stakeholder changes. What was a great situation might shift. You might be an A player on one team, but you get shifted to another team, and what was an A player on one team isn't the right fit on another team. I think that's one of the hardest parts about navigating a career in tech, maybe more so than a large, like more mature organization where things are a little bit more steady. You might have some innovation within your very specific, lane, but it's a very specific lane. So when you're at a startup or a scale up, that lane is changing so frequently. And that's one of the challenges, I think, both for managers and also for individual contributors who are just trying to navigate this world.
100% agree with that. And I think that there's a responsibility as a people leader that you have to outline what the expectations are. I remember at some point during that time, every time I met with my team and we had a change, I would start the meeting with, what changed? Literally. We had a status that's different. We had a past situation, we have a new situation. What has triggered that? And being very factual about it. We have 1,000 emotions about that, but really focusing on the facts and then being blunt with your team. Hey, this is the environment we're in. Do you want to play? Maybe the rules have changed. Do you want to play that game still? And being honest, I think that that's something we deserve and our teams deserve as well. And as leaders, sometimes because of our own traumatic experiences, we end up sugarcoating that change. But one of my principles as a product leader is to call things what they are, like literally. Hey, we can do any growth work this quarter on this team. Your team probably cannot do any growth work this fiscal year because of X, Y, Z. These changes have changed. Yeah, you really cared about this KPI. Nobody else in the company cares about this KPI right now, and we got to change. Are you in or are you out? Your team deserves that.
Hey, if you're enjoying the stories on this show and feel like you're ready to tackle some of your own hurdles, I'm here to help. If you didn't know already, I offer one-to-one coaching specifically for people who work on or around growth teams who want to have a bigger influence and impact in their roles. Maybe you're navigating some tough moments, whether it's managing your team or handling feedback. Maybe you just want to step into a bigger leadership role. Or maybe you're at a unicorn company today and you want to make sure that the company doesn't outgrow your skill set. Either way, I can help. If you're interested in learning a little bit more, head to deliveringvalue.co HubSpot.com/coaching to learn a little bit more and set up a call with me to see if we jive. All right, enough from me. Back to the episode. I remember, going back in time. So I worked at HubSpot in the very early days when it was still very much a startup, kind of maybe entering the scale up stage. It was so fun to work there and shit was always changing. And I remember being in a meeting where there was a big change at the company. There was a reorg. People didn't get laid off, but it was like, hey, we're just going to restructure and change the incentive structure. And as part of that restructure, we're going to change who your manager is. We're going to change where you sit in the office. We're going to change what your team is comped on and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it, dude. I loved it. I was like, oh, thank God. What we were doing before was kind of boring. And so now we get to mix it up. And like the way my brain works is I like change, especially with that change. It's not like, hey, you had to go figure it out, team. It's like, no, the change is already worked through. I was an individual contributor. Here's what the change means to you, Andrew. Here's what good looks like. Go get him, Tiger. I was like, oh, I'm ready. And there was someone who was in the meeting that I was in, who was literally so upset that they were borderline in tears. And it was really disruptive for them. And I remember the conversation being, they were frustrated about the way things used to be. And they were kind of holding on, well, it used to be like this and it used to feel, and this doesn't feel, they used to say, it doesn't feel very HubSpotty to do. And I'd be like, well, man, the world has changed. You can either get on or get out. And I remember that they kept this person on board and they were just unhappy for a while. And it was sort of like an infection almost, where one person is unhappy and they sort of like convince other people to like also be unhappy. And I just remember thinking what a tough situation that is. And so what you're kind of calling attention to is, as a manager, the best thing that you can do is say, hey, things are changing and it might not feel good and it might not be for you, and that's okay. And you might have been a big part of what we did before, and you still might not want to be part of what we're about to do, but here's what we're about to do and here's what it will change, instead of hiding from it or trying to tell folks, no, it'll be okay, and just wait through it. And it's a more honest view of kind of the world here.
I love it. And that goes from how you're evaluating your people, the skills that they should be focusing on, to the incentives that the team has, to the incentives that your group or company have. I totally agree. That situation at HubSpot, I can relate a lot to that as well, where I think some of us, we actually start our careers and we are ICs and we are more on the overthinking side of things. And we are really worried about being right and not worried about being curious or learning. And we are the ones showing up with 1,000 notes before presentation. And I've learned that my best presentations are actually when I don't prepare. I honestly, there will be some bumps in the road and people are going to laugh. We might say something funny or we might forget, but it feels natural. That's really the key point, I think. Are you having fun along the way? How can you make this a fun experience?
Yeah.
And how can you reconnect to all these experiences that brought you here? If this is still the right job for you, or if there's still an alignment between what you like to do and what the company can provide, how do you make it as fun as possible? It doesn't have to be so serious. My boss at Vidyard, who is one of another great mentor, another time that I got very lucky, Brian LeBrun, he would remind us all the time in team meetings, we are not doctors. We are not doing any sort of surgeries, any sort of procedures. There's not a lot to lose. How can you make this fun? And I took that to heart, really.
Why do you think it's so hard, maybe for new managers, to have a more honest view on things? That was kind of the story that you were just sharing a few minutes ago, right? Is that you had this person, probably wasn't really the right fit for your team in that moment, and took a little too long to try to figure out how to course correct that. It's something that I see all the time in my coaching practice, especially for folks who maybe they're the top IC on their team, and then all of a sudden, maybe the leader of that team moves on to another company. They get promoted to being either interim leader or the new leader of that team. And they really struggle when they know that there's not a right fit to kind of make that call. Why do you think it's especially hard for new leaders?
Because we connect with that. Oftentimes, I think, at least from my experience, when that situation happened with the product manager, I could relate to where he was coming from. And then you want them to have a different experience. It's almost like a protective parent.
Yeah.
I don't have any kids yet, but it's the same behavior that leads a lot of parents to protect them from all the possible negative things out there in the world. But you have to go through certain experiences. You have to develop, you have to find your identity. You have to have your own scars, literally. And you have to see the world by yourself. And all you deserve is really a safe space. Someone that you can come back to and have honest conversations and be transparent and ask for help. I think that applies a lot to work, And it's hard, especially if you care. If you're someone who is passionate about what you do, you will care. You really want the person to be successful, but you can't win every time.
It's so hard to not care. Like caring, and I feel like this is especially hard if you find a job where you're also really passionate about the product. It's like the best place if you work in marketing or growth because you're all in. But the downside of being all in is that it's hard sometimes to keep the right distance, either between your team and folks feeling good, or even for like yourself, if like something changes at the organization that impacts you personally, or the company isn't doing well, and maybe you're wondering if you might get laid off, or you're overworking and you're sort of resentful, but because you love the company so much, you're hesitant to like move on. And I just have seen that as a pattern in my own life. And then, as a coach now, that's really hard. I feel like keeping that distance, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just giving you my truth here. I feel like to keep that distance, it's almost like a trauma response to like getting burned after you've been all in a few times. And you sort of can't get there without that, unfortunately. At least I haven't been able to.
Same here. And then telling yourselves 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m., maybe it's time to close this laptop and go do something else.
Dude, it's hard, man. I was just talking to someone the other day about, I still do this to this moment. I will send myself an email once a month that says, work is just one part of you. Your value is all of these other things. If you were to stop working tomorrow, you would still provide a ton of value to the people that, like, I have an email that I send myself to remind myself of that. And it's still hard, man, even with the tools that are available.
Totally. It's boundaries. It's another way of thinking about boundaries and then reframe your mind. And I think when you are an ICT too, I think you're really worried about winning. And at some point you find the things that really matter. To me, it's about building a family, being a great relationship, having friendships, having hobbies, having activities, sports, all of these things that get me out of this house. Taking this dog out there, taking care of myself, having these self-care moments during the day, these reminders, and watching funny things, and just being not super engaged in activities all the time. Sometimes all you need is just 1 hour of no activity.
A little space.
Yeah.
Dude, so I think it would be very easy for someone to look at your LinkedIn profile or your resume and to think, gosh, this is someone I really respect. I look up to them. When I see the way they've navigated their career from the outside looking in, it looks really impressive. And it would be very easy for someone like you not to come on this show. Why in the world did you say yes to come on here and to shine a light on some of these tough moments?
I love the question. I want to normalize all of the things we talked about today. I really want to normalize that people don't talk enough about their learnings on LinkedIn. People talk about wins. In fact, I even installed LinkedIn from my phone years ago, and I don't regret that. But there's just an expectation, an unset expectation that you have to be winning all the time. And that's not the case. And mentorship is so important, but also mentorship for the people who are not actively looking for mentorship. Sometimes you don't really know that there is a certain area of your life that needs improvement or a reframe. And all it takes is for you to have an interaction. There might be a LinkedIn post, or there might be a conversation with someone who represents the person that you want to be, the things that you want to learn. And then having a conversation and exposing yourself to that. So I believe that we make an impact on other people, even when we are not noticing it. The way you behave in a meeting, the way that you stood out or stood up for a team member in a meeting that maybe was tough, and then someone noticed that, and they might have talked about that at home. That experience might have been put in a maple drawer and then a box, and then that will be open years later, and people be modeling that behavior. I really want to normalize that. We talk a lot about, we are not robots. I remember I would compare myself. There was this peer years ago. I would compare myself against him because, he's so stoic. He always has a response. He always knows what to say. Guess what? That's not the person that I am. And that's not the person that I wanted to be. The person that I wanted to be is a person who talks about emotions, the person who is vulnerable and open about these things, and the person who has a wisdom to know, is this a moment for this, or is this a moment to maybe manage up and talk about the company metrics with my team? And I'm also very transparent across the board, but I reiterate that people struggle with things that we don't see. And then I want to normalize struggles. I want to normalize learnings.
And I want to give you a chance to speak maybe directly to the audience if you'd like to. I feel like I've asked you a whole bunch of questions today on behalf of myself and then also probably on behalf of the audience a little bit. Anything that you haven't had a chance to say about your journey or about some of the lessons or about the inner game or anything else under the sun that you haven't had a chance to say directly yet?
One thing that I've been thinking a lot about these days is a reframing question. Actually, that was on I think Jay Shetty's podcast the other day with a spiritual leader. And it's about whenever you are in a tough situation, just thinking about what is the situation trying to teach me right now? Rather than trying to fight it, rather than trying to control it, really taking a pause. That might be 5 seconds, that might be 5 hours or 5 days. What is this trying to teach me right now? 90% of the time for me, that's trying to teach me patience. I cannot change this outcome right now. I just need to let it happen and go with it. And it might be ugly, but I have no input on that. And yeah, trying to be a little bit more compassionate with yourselves. I think that you should, first of all, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you want to do better in a certain area. There's a behavior that you want to change, or there's something that you want to learn. This is already such an excellent first step. So going from there, I believe that we are our worst enemy sometimes. And we just need to take a pause, talk to other people, ask for help when we need help, ask ourselves who are our mentors right now. If there are no mentors, maybe that's a sign. Hey, I need to build community. I need to build connections. And that might be online. There might be a one-off call. There might be a friend. But yeah, reframing our mind and being a little bit more compassionate and trying to learn something in every situation and going from there.
And if folks listening to this want to connect with you, either looking for mentorship or coaching, or maybe just an informal quick Q&A, where should we send them? How can they reach out to you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I also have my website that has some notes on some blog posts and some notes on coaching. But yeah, it's basically my family name, Söhsten.com. Or you can just find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I'd love to connect.
We'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes below. Diego, thank you for coming on, sharing your story, a little bit of the speed bumps and a whole bunch of the game, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Looking forward to your next episodes. And yeah, I hope you have a great one.
Heck yeah, man. Appreciate you.